Dr. LaTanya White, and it brings music to my ears to be here at the Featherstone Foundation's Financial Health Summit of Baltimore. I'll be talking about women building wealth and how Dynastic Wealth is a tool for them to help their families navigate through financial trauma, build wealth in all its forms, and secure family dynasties. I am Dr. LaTanya White, and I am really excited to be sharing information about wealth building, not just for women, but for communities. Some of us may be familiar with the idea that women make about 80% of all household purchasing decisions. So that is where we wanted to really elevate the experience of women in the wealth building journey. Dr. LaTanya White. I actually taught entrepreneurship for 11 years at the Florida A&M University. I know we have some HBCU prospects, some alum, but I taught entrepreneurship at the Florida A&M University down in Tallahassee. I was sharing with Michael, who will be graduating. Congratulations. I was sharing with Michael that I actually transferred or relocated my business here to the DC area because I wanted to create more impact. I wanted to share more about what I was learning about wealth with more communities. So from there, and what we'll be talking about today has been featured in Essence magazine. It was in the November-December 2024 issue with Serena Williams on the cover. And there's a copy of the article downstairs at the booth. So if you hadn't picked it up, you can take a quick scan of it. I am the creator of Dynastic Wealth, and this actually came from the research that I did. I applied for a trademark. So one of the things that I love to also share with you all about as we stay in touch is the ideas that you have, the inventions and the creativity that you have. There is wealth built into that. We have to learn how to protect that wealth, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm a Fulbright specialist, which is a cultural exchange program. I was selected by the U.S. Department of State to travel overseas to teach women business owners around the world about entrepreneurship, business, and education. So far, my daughter Sparrow and I have traveled to Tunisia, where she was just one of the beneficiaries of it, received a travel award to spend 2 weeks in the Middle Eastern, Northern African region to do entrepreneurship education. My research it's on congressional record. So there is a lot of history being wiped away, being erased, being taken off the internet. One thing that is still protected is the congressional record. So the history of the wealth experience in America, it cannot be erased if it stays on this congressional record. So I'm proud to be able to say that some of the research that I did shows up in places that cannot be erased. A lot of what Dynastic Wealth is how do we take control? How do we own our stories? How do we protect our stories in our families and in our communities, and not just relying on institutions and systems to tell our stories and protect our stories? And finally, I was a TEDx speaker, but finally, mom to Sparrow. What we're going to be talking about with Dynastic Wealth is different from generational wealth in that we are looking at not just Sparrow as the next generation, but Sparrow's children. So we're accounting for 3 generations in how we think about how we earn money, how we protect money, and how we pass down not just money, but these other forms of wealth that we'll be talking about. So these strategies to empower and build wealth, it first begins with healing. A lot of us don't know that we are walking around with trauma. We don't know that the reason that we spend money as soon as we get it is because we've had traumatic experiences where we haven't had money before. We sometimes hoard money because we have a scarcity mindset. We think that we'll never get any more money. So a part of one of the very first steps in making sure that the economic mobility that you're going to experience, Syed, as you go off to college, Michael, as you relocate and earn more money in the financial services industry, and certainly Linnea and Miriam, as you graduate and start being of service in the healthcare industry, there are some things that you might be walking around with that you don't really have the language for. And for our Gen Z, this might sound crazy, but there are people who, instead of putting their money in a bank, they put it in a shoebox and they put it in the house. They put money in mattresses, right? And a part of why there's this mistrust, I don't feel like people care about me. I don't feel like I'm safe. I feel like somebody is going to take advantage of me and my money, is a lot to do with the history of wealth in America. So the research that I conducted really honed in on the Black wealth experience. But when we stay connected, I'll make sure that you have access to resources that show how there have been Hispanic and Latin American experiences, Asian and Pacific Islander experiences, Native American experiences that have all kept these communities from building wealth. And the research dates back, of course, to chattel slavery, 1619, and pre-colonial times, but it goes all the way through to COVID and how there were communities that did not get the solutions that they needed to stay healthy, stay employed, and build wealth. So when we're talking about what we call psychological safety, that feeling of nervousness, I don't feel safe, I have a little bit of anxiety, especially when it comes to being or talking to bankers or insurance providers, sometimes other financial services professionals. In 1874, not even 10 years after what's known as Juneteenth. So the Emancipation Proclamation, this is where Abraham Lincoln issued legislation that made slavery illegal in the United States. That happened in 1863. There are some parts of the US that didn't learn about that until 2 years later in 1865. So that last colony, that last part of the US, they got that news on June 19th, 1865. So Juneteenth is known as this Freedom Day in Black and African American communities. So from 1865 to 1874, people who are newly been freed from slavery, had been working, building businesses, earning money, they were depositing their money into banks known as the Freedmen's Bank. Not even 10 years later, all of the money that they had collectively deposited, it was worth about $3 million in 1874. How many of us think $3 million is a lot of money today, right? Imagine what $3 million felt like in 1874. The Freedmen's Bank closed. Those $3 million disappeared. There was nobody to sue. There was nobody to take responsibility for it. There were families across the country who literally had nothing. So now, when it's time for me to go into a bank and to deposit my money and say, I want to build a relationship with you, although it hasn't been my experience, there's this trauma that lives in me. And it's referred to actually as post-traumatic slave syndrome. It looks at how trauma is passed down. Just like I have my grandmother's nose and my great-grandmother's forehead, I have some of my ancestors' experiences that I walk through the world with. And that impacts how I show up and how I save money, how I earn money, and how I pass down money, okay? So that's just one. One of the things that I did, I studied 150 years of Black wealth history, of the wealth mindset and wealth identity. And it's not just what happened to Black and African American people. there are similar things that happen to other ethnicities that have created financial trauma. So I want to talk, my friend across the hall, Nathaniel from Wells Fargo, he's doing the workshop on home ownership. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 1938, where the Federal Housing Authority, so that says underwriting manual, they literally, this is the federal government, literally wrote a book on how to keep communities from purchasing homes. The government wrote the book on how to keep families that look like ours from purchasing and owning homes to build wealth. That was called redlining. So in the 30s and 40s, and 60s and 70s and 80s, right? It hadn't really gone away. These, again, financial professionals, financial services professionals, they would take, and this is really back in the day, because they would take a physical map and they would look at a city, an area, and take a red pen and draw a line around the part of that map where they would allow you to purchase a home, or you to purchase a home, or you to purchase a home. If you wanted to purchase a home outside of that red line, you would be denied. What they said was the areas in the red line were financially risky. So these were the homes that we can trust you with, right? Because the property values were lower, you're making less money, you're less qualified, so maybe you can afford homes in this area. That stays with us. So when we talk about how do I get to college with no student loans? How do I lean on my family to use wealth or to borrow against the value of the home? Because our grandparents and great-grandparents had trouble purchasing homes to begin with. And then those homes were probably not earning as much appreciation. They weren't worth as much because, remember, they were in a financially risky area. Now, you also have to think about, you need insurance, right? In case something happens to the home. Insurance professionals would look at people who lived in red-lined areas, and because your home that area was financially risky, they charged you more. Just like with personal credit. If your personal credit isn't strong, your interest rate is higher, right? Because they're taking a bigger risk on you. So now you have someone who is underemployed, maybe hasn't had enough access to education to get a higher paying job, who pays more money for their mortgage and their insurance. Where can we really hold and build wealth? So these are the experiences that we live with, right? That take us into how we show up at work, what types of jobs we apply for, what majors do we choose, how do we interact with each other in our marriages and in our relationships, not knowing that this has been the experience of people. So I want to fast forward to 2021, to the creation of the Dynastic Wealth Framework. This is where, because I was teaching entrepreneurship, and I saw that at a university that had 10,000 students all across campus, in my classroom, not much bigger than this, there are more of you now in this class right now than I had in 11 years of teaching entrepreneurship. And I didn't understand why, because as an entrepreneur, I knew there was something that having your own business, it gave you control that nobody could take away from you. But where were the students? I didn't know where the students were. So I learned that there was a requirement that you had to take a class before you could take my class. And when you're in college, and you all will learn this, those electives are golden. They're hard to come by. You don't want to spend your electives on anything, but in order to take this class, you have to use 2 electives. And they cost, right? You pay for every class. So being the entrepreneur that I am, I went to the powers that be, and I said, well, can we just remove this extra class? But it does not work like that in higher education. Y'all will know, you'll find out, right? There's always a rule and a person that manages the rule, and you got to be on the good side of that person so they can talk to the person. It was a lot. And so I decided that I was going to go to grad school because I also recognized that I wasn't speaking their language, right? So I see Beatrice here, and they have the interpretation, right? Because we aren't speaking the same language. What I had to do is go to grad school to learn how to speak the language of the administrators, of the faculty, of the university leaders. And what came out of that was the research that I stumbled upon that introduced me to all. I didn't know this stuff. I had my master's in business. I had been in business for myself for years. I did not know any of this until about 2019, 2020. So I'm only a little bit newer, right? I've only been down this road a little bit longer than you all have if you're not a history major, like if you don't already know this. So as we talk about navigating through financial trauma, one of the things that you have to do as leaders of your households and communities is give yourself grace. You have to be able to forgive yourself for the things that you didn't know. You have to be able to forgive your parents and the people that loved you for not teaching you what they didn't know. And so what we're going to be doing here today moving forward, because you've been introduced to this, now you have the responsibility to drive this information forward and pass this information down as well. But what is dynastic wealth? I remember Lawrence asked me that earlier, so we'll get into that. So that first step is healing your family, healing yourself and your family. The next strategy is building the wealth. But what I'm going to share with you here is going to kind of turn what we think we know about wealth on its head. So dynastic wealth is different from generational wealth, from what we understand or what we've been introduced to generational wealth. Generational wealth is usually the money, right? It's usually building the business, owning the home, purchasing the stock, having the insurance products. That's only one form of wealth. So in the research that I did, I saw that while we are educated, we're going to college, we're making more money than our parents made, but we haven't learned how to pass that money down. The other thing I learned was it's more than just money. So the Rockefeller family, anybody familiar with that name? Okay, so most of the time when you hear about generational wealth, you hear about the Rockefeller family. John D. Rockefeller started that business in the late 1870s. The Rockefeller family remains among America's 25 wealthiest families in America. How can that be if they're just passing down money? How can it be that 9, 10 generations later, 200 people later, they still have money in their family? Because it's more than just money. One of the things that I learned was that there are families who are building 5 forms of wealth. And I'm not just talking about the 5 forms of active versus passive income. It is financial wealth, it's spiritual wealth, this wealth of knowledge, intellectual wealth, and relational wealth. These are what's called qualitative forms of wealth. This can't be deposited into a bank. It can only be deposited into the spirit, soul, and character of your family members. So we'll talk about what those are, kind of unpack each of them. So to be sure though, so that you have the definition, a dynastic family, they don't even use language like generational wealth. They are not talking about generational wealth. They are building wealth dynasties. So again, for my Gen Alpha, this may go over your head. You might not be familiar with this, but there used to be this TV show called Dynasty. And it was about this family that passed down assets. I think it was like a horse farm. They passed it down for generations and generations. So you have like the TV show Dynasty, There are political dynasties, right? We're not that far from the nation's capital. The Kennedy family, that's a political dynasty. More than one generation was involved. And then for historical purposes, we also have like our ancient Asian, like the Ming dynasty. These were political, international political powers. But the key is a dynastic family is controlling their wealth, whether it be from a business, whether it be from life insurance products or a family trust, for a minimum of 3 consecutive generations. Remember, I talked about Sparrow's children. I won't reach dynastic status. My family won't become a dynasty until my grandchildren have control of the wealth and of the assets. Not that they're born, not that they turn 18 or 25, but that they have enough knowledge, enough confidence, and hopefully enough character to control the wealth and use it in a way that's positively impacting communities, right? So that's our foundational definition of what a dynasty is. So these are the conditions. Either you've controlled the wealth, like the money and the assets, the property and all those things, or the business. So we can think about, say, the Rockefeller family as having wealth because they have Rockefeller Center, Rockefeller University, Rockefeller Family Foundation, but they don't have Rockefellers Incorporated, right? Versus the Walmart family or the Walton family, that's their business. A lot of their businesses count, a lot of their wealth is tied up in the business. The Walton family just reached dynastic status in 2015. And so how this worked, Sam Walton, he was one of the brothers that founded the company. Sam Walton's granddaughter, so that's our 3rd generation, right? But not the granddaughter, it was her husband. So it's still on that 3rd generation, but he became chairperson of the board. So the 3rd generation controlled how the business operated, and that's how they got to dynastic status. So we'll talk a little bit about, by blood, marriage, or adoption, but it's always down to 3 generations. That's the key. Financial wealth, it's the foundation, right? Like there will be no dynasty if there are no financial assets. But these they could look differently. We're talking about managing your personal finances, having a strong personal credit background, knowing how to budget, knowing how to save and manage your money, right? But also entrepreneurship. You don't have to start a business from scratch. If you're managing your personal finances well enough and then building relationships with financial institutions, you may be able to get enough money to buy a business that's already existing, already making money, so you don't have to start from scratch. And it doesn't have to even be in the area that you feel like you're good at. All you need to know is it making money, and can we keep it making money? So there's your personal finances, entrepreneurship, financial investments, so stocks, bonds, treasury bills, those kinds of things, insurance products. A lot of us are mostly familiar with insurance just to cover the death part of it, the burial. Remember we talked about the Rockefeller family? One way that they're making sure those 200 people still have access to those assets is through a cash value or a whole life insurance policy, where the more you pay into your policy, the more money it earns. So there is a certain way that they keep that life insurance, but what has been said is that for everyone that's born into the family, they take out a life insurance policy on that person, and then they make the life insurance, the family trust, the beneficiary. So the money just keeps adding and adding up. And then, of course, real estate. Real estate investment, real estate trusts, where maybe you don't want to own the property outright, but kind of like a mutual fund. You can own a portion of the value of those products. So these are some pathways to building the foundation of the dynasty. But this is where we start to get into the difference between the real difference between generational wealth and dynastic wealth. Because generational wealth is usually focused on you, right? It's focused on the individual making the money or the people in their household. With dynastic wealth, we're opening our hearts. Remember, I talked about having grace, right? Holding space for people to heal. We're opening our hearts to the family. Now, in order for these family conversations, in order for everybody to not end up on Iyanla Fix My Life, we have to have done our work. So that when we talk to 3 and 4 generations, cousins that we may not have seen for years, or aunts and uncles who are kind of isolated from the family, we're talking about our family identity. Like, who are we as a family? It's not just who am I as LaTanya, as Sparrow's mom, who am I as the grandchild of Willie Mae Fersher? And how does my identity play into how I relate to my cousins, my children, and how I show up in the world? How do I represent this family in how I show up in the world? Now, I gotta say, everybody is not gonna wanna participate. Everybody is not going to want to be a part of it, and that's okay. But what we're doing with Dynastic Wealth is still making sure that even for that uncle who doesn't want to participate, his grandchildren still get the benefit. His grandchildren don't have to start from scratch because we had a falling out 20 or 30 years ago. So family identity, our family values, what's important to us as a family? Is it that we want to be lifelong learners? Is it that we want to lead with our religious identity? Do we want to make sure that we're always being helpful to the community, that we're service providers, or we're involved in philanthropic endeavors? And the beauty of this is what we make sure to do is those generations that come after us, they don't go looking to social media for their identity. They don't go to Instagram, or I don't even know what else is out there, but they don't go to other places to find out who they are. So what we're doing with that is making sure that we know what our vision for wealth is. Because we've lived through and are living through financial trauma, we don't always have the space or the time to think about, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard, right? Yes, I want to make sure my children have it better than I did, that they don't have to work as hard, but what about their children? Are we thinking about what we want the next 3 generations to experience and making sure that they aren't starting from scratch? Now, we'll talk more about the family constitution, but that is really the document that tells the story of your family. It doesn't have to be lost to history. It doesn't have to be banned in a book. It doesn't have to be erased because there's no more funding to support it. It's your family maintaining control of your story and your history. So that's our spiritual wealth. It's not based on any religion. It's really based on the idea that we're doing this work. We're going to that college. We're in this profession because there is something greater than ourselves in what we're doing and how we're showing up in the world. So we talked about financial wealth, spiritual wealth. Remember, there are 5, so we're going to go through these next 3 pretty quickly. The wealth of knowledge is, like, could you imagine having your grandfather's life story, like, easily accessible, and the things that they learned, the skills that they have? Could you imagine using their life story as a book, as an instruction manual on how to navigate through the world? My sister, when she was in the early stages of buying her first home, she said she didn't know what she was doing. She was really confused. And it was a little bit off-putting to me because we had real estate professionals in our family. But we didn't have we weren't in the habit of talking to each other about what we do for work, right? I only know you as auntie this or uncle that. So with the wealth of knowledge, what we're doing is being intentional about sitting down and interviewing people in our families. Just like we interview for jobs, we interview employees, we interview for all these things, but we aren't taking into account our own life and lived experience. So we're documenting our family history. Like, how did we end up in Tallahassee if everybody's from Miami? What was that story? What was the migration? What was happening that made us do that? And the passion, skills, and abilities, of course, lived experience, but the passion, skills, and abilities is so important because, and I'll share an example. One of my cousins, he's so good with his hands, but I only knew that he was just a really good cook. So my grandmother's house down in Miami, he renovated it like by himself, and I had no idea. I had no idea he was that good at what he was doing. But remember, I also said we have real estate professionals in our family. Why didn't we know that? Like, why haven't they worked together on projects or flipping houses and wholesaling? Because we hadn't been in the habit of knowing what everyone loves to do, what they're good at, and what they are able to teach and share with each other. So that's the wealth of knowledge. The wealth of knowledge should also include family recipes. There's a TV show on the History Channel. It's called The Food That Built America. It talks about Campbell's soup and Kellogg's cereal, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A. These are all family-owned businesses. So what we've been conditioned to think, what we've been told is that what we love to eat in that special recipe that we make it, that it has no value. But all the food in your home is more than likely owned by a family corporation, or at least it started there. So this wealth of knowledge includes the things that you are good at, the things that come naturally to you and that have been passed down to you through your family. With intellectual wealth, this is really about, I need to make the investment to be the best version of myself. And as we build healthier relationships within our families, we should be talking about how do we make the investment for you to become the best version of yourself as well. And not just academically. Remember I talked about my cousin who renovated the house? An investment in his intellectual wealth would have been sending him to get his general contractor's license. Because then that turns around and it can become the opportunity for financial wealth. Now we can, as a family, generate money from the things he's good at, from the things he loves to do, but he saw that we believed in him. He saw that we supported what he was interested in and not just what we wanted him to be good at. And intellectual wealth is really about becoming the best version of yourself and helping others in the family to do the same. And now finally, we have relational wealth. One of the points on the history timeline was Plessy versus Ferguson. And that happened in 1896, where it was illegal for us to be in a room together. Like our lives would literally be in danger by being in this room together because we had different ethnic backgrounds, because we had different skin colors. And what that means is now I don't know how to build relationships with people that have money. And relational wealth brings us back to that. It makes it easier for me to build a relationship with you because you brought me into the spaces where you thrive, where you self-actualize, where you're the best version of yourself. So hopefully some of that will rub off on Sparrow. Y'all check with me in about 15 years and I can let you know. And then the last part. So heal your family, build wealth. Remember, there are these 5 forms of wealth. The last part is secure your dynasty. And you have to protect your dynasty. All of this rich information that you learn, all of the recipes that you've documented, all of the ways that you're building financial wealth, you have to protect it. And the way that we do that as these guardians of your family wealth is having your family constitution. So that really is just this document, right? Just like there really is a Constitution of the United States, and some people might not like to think so, but it's a guiding document. It gives you, how do we operate? What are the rules of how you show up in this family? You born into this family through blood, you're related, let me say it this way. You're related to this family through blood, marriage, or adoption. There is something that's expected of you, right? And we're going to be investing in you to become the best version of yourself. And that gets captured in the family constitution. So again, you don't have to go to the internet to figure out, who am I? How do I do this? How do I pass this down? The family estate plan is protecting the assets. So we purchased the home, right? Whose name is on the deed to the home? You've bought the business. Who has ownership and how much ownership in the business? And the family trust is the legal vehicle that says this is where our wealth is. If you want to take out money for college, you have to go to the family trust to make a request for distribution. But the real way that you pass it all down is through a family retreat. So some communities have family reunions where everybody gets together. You're gonna put money in to send somebody off to college. We're gonna all wear the same t-shirt. We're gonna meet at the park. Are you coming to the cookout? That kind of thing. What the family retreat is we sit down and we go through all of these documents, and you come to the cookout, and we see you at the scholarship banquet, and we all wearing the same t-shirt. So it brings the culture into the strategy. And that's the way that these are some of the ways that families are building dynasties. So now, from what you've learned today, what we'll be looking for 25, 40, 60 years from now is your family dynasty. So the work that you'll be able to do after learning this is truly what's going to be helping to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. It'll make things more level playing field so that your family will be a part of these ways that nobody else has to start from scratch. So what I would love to invite you to do is just stay in touch. Literally, this only scratched the surface, as you could probably imagine, but these are these strategies to empower you, empower your family, and empower your communities.